Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second class in the series of Veggie Gardening for Beginners. This class is about cool weather veggies. My name is Krista. I'm your librarian host this evening from the Poughkeepsie Public Library District. Thanks so much for coming out this evening. And please join me in welcoming our master gardeners from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Dutchess County, who are going to have a great presentation about veggies that need cool weather to grow. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I sign off for now is please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation and keep your videos off. If you do have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat, as a few of our gardeners will be monitoring the chat that whole time. Presentation will be recorded, and I will be sending out a link to your email that you signed up with in case you miss anything or you kind of want to go back and see if there's more things you missed or you want to rehash the video. So don't worry if you missed something, you'll get a link to that as well. And we do have another class in this series next Monday, the 19th, on veggies that need the heat. And you know what, I'm going to put right in the chat here, the link to that if you want to register while you're thinking of it. And other than that, that's pretty much it for me. So I'm going to pass it on to Chris Ferrero, who's going to talk some more. Have a good day.
You can always count on me to talk some more, Krista. Thank you. Hi, everybody. We started last week with the introduction, and I started things off. But this week, we've got my two colleagues who are going to handle the cool weather veggies. And I am Chris Ferrero and have been with Cornell Cooperative Extension as a master gardener. In fact, all three of us are for the same class, the class of 2012. Yay, 2012. But that's where we first met, and we've been working together since. In fact, this series, the vegetable series, and sometimes we give it in a longer form, sometimes in a shorter pod. But this series is now 7 or 8 years old. So we're kind of hitting our stride. And we support each other. So I am going to go to the chat room with Lorraine, and we're going to see if we can handle your questions. But here and there, we might interrupt our, oh no, not Lorraine, Linda, because our first Lorraine. Speaker, oh, is he? Yeah, our first speaker is Lorraine Seach. Lorraine is going to be starting off with the cool weather vegetables. And this is the week that we go vegetable by vegetables. We talk about the different plants. And as opposed to last week where we talked about some functional areas of getting prepared. And then halfway through, Linda DeGasper is going to pick up with the other cool weather vegetables. And there are, are there like 13 of them? 15 of them? Anyway, you should have your plant list in front of you because you probably want to take lots of notes. And so I'm going to head over to the chat room and see if I can help with that. And we might interrupt the speaker if we were getting certain questions that we think might apply to the whole group. But Lorraine, how about if you start by introducing yourself and then share your screen?
Okay. Share. There we go. Look at that. I did it. I'm new to Zoom, I will admit. Last week I had some technical difficulties, but I hope I learned what to do. Mm-hmm. As Chris said, I'm a master gardener since 2012, and my passion is vegetable growing. A lot of master gardeners love the flowers and the perennials and everything. Yeah, they're okay, but I like to eat. And I will tell you, my favorite vegetable of all times is tomato. There's nothing like a tomato. But my second favorite vegetable I'm going to cover tonight, it's actually kale. Kale is very good. There's a movement going on called Eat More Kale. And it's been like a couple of years now where there's recipes to make kale with everything, to use them in your smoothies. You could just live on kale. Anyway, I'm going to get started with first. Here's our list of vegetables that we'll be covering tonight. They're all vegetables that grow best when the weather is cool, because when the weather gets hot, they go, Peas, carrots, radishes, beets, chard, kale, lettuce, arugula, spinach, broccoli, and onions. I hope your favorite is among this list. So let's get started. Okay, oops. I have technical difficulties. I guess I have to ask the question. Do you see all the people on the side? No, it's covering my slide.
Yes, no, this is, and it does on your screen, but on our screens, it's good.
Okay, so I don't have to worry about it because I can't figure out how to get rid of it. I wish I
Nope.
could.
What we're looking at is perfectly fine.
Lorraine, you can get rid of it by going to the top menu bar of the view box that you're seeing on the right, and you'll see different shapes of
Oh,
rectangles.
I see.
You can minimize.
Okay, good. That's much better because I'd be confused, like not knowing what my slide is saying when I'm covering it up. So the vegetables like it cool because they want to be the best for you. They want to be crisp and delicious, have the best texture and flavor. And it's nice to eat vegetables early in the season. You don't want to wait until the midsummer when your veggies appear. So you could actually, with some of these vegetables, still be planting them and still be eating them. And that's true for like radishes. Radishes are a short crop. So plant them in succession, like a couple every week, and you'll keep eating for a long harvest period. Also, succession planting allows for efficient use of your garden space because there are so many vegetables you want to grow and there's only so much good soil to plant it in. So it allows you to get your cool weather veggies planted and harvested before you need to worry about your summer vegetables. Okay, there are also crops that grow poorly in the heat. There's pests, diseases, and especially with the greens like lettuce, arugula, as they grow into the heat, they get bitter and they will actually bolt, and that makes them really, really bitter. So with cool weather veggies, you should monitor them and eat them before they get bitter. Okay, peas. We're going to start off with peas. Peas are members of the legume family. They're annual plants. You need to sow them every year directly in your garden. All the peas are climbers. They grow from 2 feet to 7 feet, which means that you're going to have to stake them up. And we'll go through that later. The extra benefits of peas are that they get nitrogen from the air and they fix nitrogen in your soil. And they also are self-fertilizing. So you don't have to worry about pollinators combining to fertilize your peas. And also, peas are able to survive a 27-degree freeze. And that's why we think of peas as actually the first crop that you could put in your soil as soon as it's workable. And there's a group of people who believe in planting peas on St. Patrick's Day, which is March 17th. So it might be cold out on March 17th, and there might be some snow on the ground in places, but as long as they could get their soil, shovel it up and put the seeds in, they will. So that's why peas are the earliest crop you can actually put in your garden. Oops. There are 3 types of peas. There are snow peas, snap peas, and shelling peas. Shelling peas are typically the ones most people think of, the ones that you could buy bagged as frozen in the grocery store. But there's also 2 other kinds. Snow peas are the flat peas with little pea pods in them, and you eat both the pod and the pea. Snap peas are peas that are, here, I'll put my cursor there so you can see. Snap peas are the seeds that you got from the library if you picked them up. They grow a little bit fatter. You could eat the pod and the seeds and the peas. Okay, here's your planting guide for planting your peas. They actually get planted very close together. As you can see the ruler on the right, they're planted about 1 inch or 2 apart, and you plant them 1 inch or 2 deep. They can be planted with some shade, okay, but they do like full sun. And the soil pH is what we have here. Around here, we have typically 6.5, and this is 6 to 7, what makes them happy. The soil should be well drained, moist, and loose. And with peas, do not soak the seeds or thin the plants once they start growing. When they get 2 inches high, you want to add your mulch. And here's a picture of the plants along with mulch. When you grow peas, like I mentioned before, you must trellis them because otherwise they'll be on the ground and that's not so great. So you could use any kind of trellis for your peas. Wire fencing, nylon netting, a tomato cage, string just tied to your deck railing, branches and twine, anything that you could think of to keep your peas from laying on the ground and growing tall. In this picture here, oops, guess I'm having trouble. We see the snow peas in the front and the cascadia in the back. When do you harvest your peas? Well, peas take typically 55 to 70 days. So that's like less than 2 months or about a week or two more than 2 months, depending on the variety that you choose. So if you plant your seeds now in mid-April, which is the best time to plant them, you'll be harvesting them in June and July. And the harvest will continue for 3 to 5 weeks. If you leave them on the vine too long, the peas are going to be starchy and dry instead of sweet, and they'll be too fat. Like when I say too fat, see these two here on the left? They're past perfect. You can see how much they're wider, whereas an ideal pea is going to be the size of your little finger. And if you sow some this week, some next week, you'll have a continuous harvest until it gets too hot, and then it'll be end of pea season. Carrots. Isn't this a great picture? One carrot is hugging the other, and it's squeezing it really tight. You see it squeezing it? Carrots belong to the parsley family. So that's why the top of the carrot kind of looks like parsley. You could start planting seeds early. You could plant them 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost, which is about the middle of this month, April 15th. And you could continue planting carrots a little bit, every week up until 12 weeks before the first frost in the fall. And that would be the middle of July, July 15th. Carrots love full sun, the soil, especially for carrots. If you want to grow the long ones, the soil needs to be rock free, because when a carrot tries to grow and hits this rock, guess what? It's going to bend, it's going to fork. It's not going to be a happy carrot, or I should say it's not going to be a perfect carrot. Carrot will be happy, but it's not going to be one that you typically would see in the store. So your soil has to be deep, loose, and free of stones. And of course, well drained with lots of organic material. And the soil must be consistently moist. Now, if you look at this little picture we have, you can see carrots of all different colors, because carrots come in many varieties. We see purple, yellow, white. So just wanted to let you know, all carrots are not orange.
Lorraine?
Yes?
Hi, this is Linda. I just wanted to share with the group a common myth that carrots need sandy soil. I think it stems from the idea that sandy soil tends to have obviously no rocks and is well draining. However, it's not critical or needed. Any well draining soil that's free of rocks will grow good carrots. Just wanted to share that.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Great. Thanks, Linda. When you're planting carrots, you want to plant them in moist soil by digging a 2-inch deep furrow and then planting the seeds a 1/2 inch apart. And you're going to cover the seeds then with a 1/2 inch of fine soil. And you could see how tiny they are. These are raw carrot seeds. In this picture, the carrot seeds have been have been coated, and that's why they're called pelted. So they're covered with some material that'll dissolve at some point when they're in the ground. This here is what we call a seed tape. Could you see the little seed here, then here, then here, then here? It's a tape that has the carrots perfectly spaced. So you would just put the carrots seed tape in the ground and cover it with soil. That's the easy way, but we gave you seeds like these, and so you have to follow my directions. Here we go. Okay, so then once you have them in the ground, you have to cover that furrow with a board until the seeds germinate. Now you're gonna say, what? Cover with a board? Why? I don't understand that. Well, the reason being, if it rains hard, these little seeds are gonna float away and you're not gonna have carrots. So the purpose of the board is just to keep them in place as well as keeping them moist, because the board on top will keep the moisture underneath. And when it rains or you water your seeds, you just pour water on top of the board and it'll flow down the sides and it'll get to your carrots. So you don't even have to worry about, you don't have to go out there and lift it every day to see if the little greens are pulling up from the ground. It's okay if they get a start in the dark, and one day you'll pull up your board and find out that you have a lot of little tops there that are not exactly green because they haven't seen the sun. But as soon as you remove that board, they'll pop right up and be happy little carrots. So when you're growing carrots, you have to be careful that moisture is consistent. And also, they germinate slowly. That's why this board that you're going to put over your seeds, it's going to be on there for 1 to 3 weeks because they take a long time to germinate. And you'll think that, oh, they're never going to grow. They'll grow. Give them, 1 to 3 weeks. You could pick the board up and look at them every week, or just wait 3 weeks and pick it up. It'll be fine. Okay, then if necessary, you weed out the weeds amongst your carrots. You could thin and fertilize them as well as mulch them. Now, when you thin them, those parts are edible. So they'll taste different, but you could enjoy your carrot tops, or carrot greens, I should call it. Okay, this is 3 pictures of a carrot bed from April till June. Here's they already were in the ground for their 1 to 3 weeks to germinate, and then they germinated. And you could see here, they have more weeds in here than carrots. So this is weeded, thinned, and mulched, a month later, 28 days. Looks much better. And then 50 days, it's almost harvest time. Look how beautiful it looks. All grown up and ready to eat. Okay, so here's the spacing of root crops. Now, you also have to know what carrot variety you're growing, because some are really fat carrots and some are thin carrots. And we told you to plant them a ½ inch apart. So you can see the ruler here. It's like, okay, they're spread. Looks good. But if you're planting these red corded chantenays, that ain't good, because look at this one. He's like almost 2 inches wide. So you'd have to thin him out. These are bolero carrots, and they too are almost 2 inches wide. So know what you're growing. Tell you the next slide. You're growing these. You're growing ya-ya carrots, which will be ready for you to eat in 63 days, 60 days to maturity. So these are a smaller carrot. You could see they're not as long, and they're on the thin side. So you don't have to worry about getting the rocks out like 8 inches deep, unless you really want to. But yours are going to be a smaller variety of carrots, and they're a very good tasting carrot. So when it's time to harvest, you should use a garden fork to loosen the soil without damaging your carrot, because it could be hard just grabbing the green part of the carrot and trying to pull it out. Most likely it won't come out easily. The problems of a carrot. I mentioned forking. Forking is all the little carrots that appear to be growing off the big one, but it's just problems caused by rocky soil, poor drainage, insufficient water, or high levels of nitrogen.
By the way, the forked carrots, though, are just as tasty, right? Those little babies growing off the mother, Lorraine?
Yes, they can. There's nothing wrong with eating them. They're fine.
Your carrots are not going to look perfect like the ones in the store at all, but they will taste great.
This is true. Okay, now we're going to move on to radishes. Radishes are the crop that you're going to harvest in 1 month after you plant it. It's one of the spring's first edible crops. So radishes come in many types, sizes, and colors. They could be white, they could be purple, they could be a mixture of pink and red. They could be long, they could be round. There are many types, sizes, and colors. And also the taste, that they could be pinchy or they could be mild. They're easily grown from seed, starting now in early spring. And they're also a great trap crop for other veggies. I'll also mention here on the slide, I have not attractive to deer. That's good because deer could be like sad. They could eat your whole garden in one sitting. But anyway, deer don't typically like radishes. When I talk about a great trap crop, what a trap crop is you would plant radishes near other plants that you don't want bugs to get it. And that would be like, say, your cabbages or your arugula. You would plant radishes near there, but you're never going to harvest those radishes to eat. You're going to leave them there because bugs will come and eat the radishes rather than eat your cabbage or your arugula.
Hey, Lorraine, we got a question about, you used the word pinchy, so I'm going to throw this back at you. Which radish variety is pinchy? Do you have varieties of radishes that you find milder versus spicier?
Well,
is that what you mean by pinchy, by the way? Spicy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Spicy. The radishes that you got in your seed packet are cherry bell radishes, and they're a mild radish.
Mild, yeah.
So we didn't give you the spicy ones.
I don't know whether Deborah wants a spicy one, but she asked which radish variety is pinchy.
Right now I can't. Nothing. A pinchy one.
That's something, you know. You actually you could just Google spicier radish varieties.
Yes, if you like it spicy or hot. I don't know what you call it. Some like it hot, some like it spicy.
Say spicy, yeah.
Okay, so radishes like full sun, but again, they could tolerate some shade. Loose, well-drained soil. They must be consistently kept moist, or here we go, or the radishes may get too spicy. So even though these cherry bell radishes are mild, if they're not treated properly, they too could get spicy. And when they grow, you're going to see the tops emerge. Like, there's not a picture here, but when the tops start emerging from the soil, then you know it's getting close to harvest time. When you're planting the radishes, you plant the seeds 1 inch apart and a 1/2 inch deep. This is very suitable to succession planting, like plant some radishes this week, some next week, and that way you won't have to eat all your radishes in 1 week. Plant small quantities every 7 to 14 days, and you'll have a continual harvest to pick from. Here's a typical description that would be on a radish package, and the seeds look like this. You would put about 16 radish seeds per square foot, and they're going to be round red roots with short tops. And of course, you could eat the tops as well as the red radish itself. And this is quite mild until you don't do what I told you, and it won't be mild. It'll be spicy. This one will mature in 21 days.
We have a question about rabbits and woodchucks. Do they typically dig for radishes?
Woodchucks, if you don't have it fenced in, will dig under your garden. And
yeah,
I think they're like any other. They'll go after whatever you have planted. And probably they'd like the radish greens.
Yeah, I think they probably want the red. Yeah, because spicy vegetables tend, well, it's up for grabs. I'm not sure about that. You could Google that too.
Right. So
Questions about seeds, by the way. Krista still has seeds from that were dropped off at the library last week, and you can email Krista for picking up your seeds if you didn't get them last week, and if you did register for that class, because we gave enough seeds to the library for all of the attendees last week.
Carissa said you could pick them up at the main circulation desk at Adrian's anytime the library's open.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I already talked about all this. If you don't harvest your radishes when they're ready, they're going to lose quality. They're going to get spongy and fibrous, and you won't want to eat them, but the insects will. The insects will find them, and that's why we call them a trap crop. So what we refer to is harvest in 30 to 40 days. The number of days to harvest is from the day the seed gets planted in the garden. And this will be different for transplants, but for seeds that you're going to put in, the days to maturity will be stated on the packages, your seed packages. Okay, now we're going to move on to beets. Beets are also good. And the beets are usually grown for their roots, which is the beet itself, but beet tops are very good. And there are people who just grow them because they like the beet tops. You could start it from seed in your garden, which would be like right now in mid-April, and they produce a great yield in a small space. Growing conditions, they like full sun, but they'll tolerate shade. The soil pH is over 6.0. Again, like everything we've been talking about, they must have consistent moisture, and the beet itself may not form if it dries out, or it could stop growing if it's at the hint of a dry spell. Crowding can produce a misshapen crop. You can see this is crowded, although these don't look misshapen. This one's kind of fallen over, but thinning them is easy, and whatever you pull out, you could eat when you thin them. You know, the little beet itself or the beet leaves, they're delicious. Oops. Okay. When to plant your beet seeds? Start sowing them in mid-April, like that's next week. No, it's this week. We're already mid-April. My goodness. We're April 11th already. You could plant them this week. Plant the seeds a 1/2 inch deep and 2 inches apart, and then thin them to 4 to 6 inches apart. Here's a picture of transplants. If you got transplants from a garden center, you could put them in the ground now too. This is one crop that you could either buy transplants or start from seed. It's up to you, whatever is easier for you. When you harvest your beets, harvest them at the size level, golf ball if you want them tender and mild, or you could let them grow a little bit longer and harvest them at the size of a tennis ball, but no bigger. If you're eating the plant greens, you could eat the plant greens as soon as it starts, growing that it's a big enough leaf that you want to eat it. You could take at least 1/3 of the plant's green tops at one time, and the root will still grow. So you could harvest the roots at maturity, but you could still eat the greens before that. And then if you grow a lot of beets, you could store them in your refrigerator. After you cut the greens off the tops, you could put them in your refrigerator and they'll store up to 10 months later. Okay, now we're going to talk about pests. Pests feed on beet greens, chard, and kale. Cutworms. We talked about them briefly last time. They're these curly little things that come and chop off your vegetable at the base as soon as it emerges from the ground. And the best way to avoid cutworms is to protect the seedling with a collar. And you would put the collar around before, as soon as you put the seed in the ground. Also, there are beet leaf miners, and these are flies that are going to come and lay eggs on your leaves. And you could see this tiny little white thing in this insert. That's the eggs. And once it sprouts, the larvae will munch on your beet tops and look whole, whole, whole. And they could actually make you come down to ribs. So in order to avoid some of these leaf miners, you want to use a row cover to keep the flies off. And we talked about row covers last time. Those white, lightweight fabric that you see in the fields where a lot of greens are growing.
Lorraine,
Yes?
there's a question in the chat box that what is a collar?
A collar? A collar is a piece of cardboard that you just cut like an inch piece of cardboard. You put it in a circle and you put it in the ground around the plant. It's nothing fancy. Or you could use a piece of plastic, whatever you want, but it's something that surrounds the seed or the transplant so that a cutworm can't get near the plant itself. It'll be blocked. It's like the cutworm comes along and it walks into a wall. So is that a question that an answer that the person understands? I don't see. If we were doing this live, we would have a picture to show you, but.
Yeah, I think you answered the question, and I know that there'll be a picture in one of the vegetables that I'm covering.
Oh, great. Okay, so if you think you're gonna get leaf miners, I would advise getting row covers because otherwise your whole crop could be ruined. And then we also say you could wash off the eggs, off the leaves with a hose, but that's kind of hard. You have to get down there and, wash underneath every leaf.
Lorraine?
Yes?
Hi, another question from the chat box. A couple of people wanted to ask that they grew kale and they had some wormy thing that ate it down to the ribs. It was like a kale skeleton.
Same thing. It's the leaf miner.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna get to kale in a couple of vegetables, but yeah, same thing. And to avoid that, you wanna use row covers. Okay, so the beet greens are attractive to rabbits, groundhogs, and sometimes deer. So be careful if you're planting beets that you have it fenced in so that these critters don't come and have their salad before you.
We also want to mention, I think, because we're seeing questions that were answered in last week's introductory class. Please, if you missed last week's class, please email Krista and see if you can get the recording of last week's class, because it'll answer a lot of these questions, which we can't really stop and back up to answer this week and next week. Thanks.
Okay, our next cool weather vegetable is Swiss chard. Swiss chard is kind of like spinach if you've never had it. It can be grown from seed starting in mid-April this week or from transplants. It's a big plant. It's kind of like kale. You know how big kale grows. Each plant could reach a foot to a foot and a half in height and up to 2 feet in diameter. It's a very pretty plant if you get the rainbow Swiss chard. And in this little picture, you could see all the various colors. That's one of the reasons that it's often used in flower beds for the beautiful color that it adds and the foliage interest. Mm-hmm. The leaves cook like spinach. I mentioned that it's kind of like spinach, but it doesn't exactly taste like spinach. And the stems will take longer. So when I'm cooking Swiss chard, I'll cut off the stems and I'll start cooking them before I add in the leaves. And it's just fine. Growing conditions, full sun, but tolerates some shade. This is one of the vegetables that's not too fussy about the soil, but it does like it to be rich and loose. Water at the ground level, because like we told you before, wet leaves are vulnerable to diseases such as leaf spot. If you're growing in containers, You could even grow Swiss chard in a container. When you're planting your Swiss chard, you could sow it 2 weeks before the last frost. In our area last year, I wrote it on the calendar and I went to look at it. The last frost I marked was actually May 10th last year. But on May 8th and May 9th, we had snow last year. So be aware that we could get snow in May. It does happen. So based on last year, you could sow your Swiss chard at the end of April. Plant the seeds a 1/2 inch deep, 4 to 5 inches apart. And then thin the seedlings when they're a 1/2 foot to a foot apart. And don't forget, anything you thin, you could eat. It's good vegetables with a lot of nutrients. Then you want to make sure, again, like we told you in the first class, we want you to mulch to retain the moisture and suppress weeds. Your chard, Swiss chard, will be available for you to harvest in 50 to 60 days, but the seeds are going to pop up in 5 to 16 days. So if you're not going to wait until the whole plant is mature, which is like almost 2 months, you could break off the outer stalks, and the plant will continue to grow. So you could eat while it continues to grow. And if you cut back the entire plant to new shoots, it'll regrow to full size in 3 weeks. So it's one of those cut and grow plants, which is very good. It withstands frost, and it will actually get sweeter after a frost until a really, really hard frost comes along and kills it. Kale. Kale is my second favorite vegetable. And kale is one vegetable, kind of like chard, that continues, you could continue starting from spring until, if you have it covered, you could actually have snow on the ground and continue to harvest your kale. It's a cut and come again crop. Each plant is 1.5 feet to 3 feet tall and up to 3 feet in diameter. Produces all season, like I mentioned, and the best quality is going to be in the fall when the weather starts getting cool, and it's going to get sweeter when frost hits it. It's like Swiss chard. It can be used in flower beds because it has it's very pretty. The leafy kale, the curly kale. It has a beautiful form, color, and texture. Mature kale can take on many shapes. It can be smooth, bumpy, curly, or lacy. And it can range in color from a frosty green to a purple, actually. So it depends on the variety of kale that you pick. Now, I have in this little picture here, ornamental kale sold in the fall is not a food crop. So these are very pretty plants. Do not eat them. The only plant that's edible is kale is of a garden variety, even though you could plant that in your flower beds as well. Growing conditions: full sun, partial sun. It likes firm, moist, well-drained soil with average pH. You have to mulch to retain water and suppress weeds. Water at ground level, again, because you don't want your leaves to remain wet because they'll get diseases and fungus. Transplant starting if you buy transplants from the store, you could put your transplants in the ground right now. You could transplant starting 4 to 6 weeks before the final frost, which is about April 1. But in our area, like I said, last year it was May 10th. You want to space your kale 1.5 feet apart, mulch to retain moistures and suppress weeds. Now, I could sympathize with the person who mentioned that their kale was nothing but ribs. That happened to me. The first year I planted kale, I had beautiful kale. No one touched it. Not one fly, not one bug, no one. The second year, it kind of had some, holes in it. The third year, I had nothing but ribs. The way to prevent that is row covers. You have to put row covers. It's like these bugs, flies, whatever, these insects, they find your kale and they remember, oh, that garden had the best kale. And they hang around. I don't know if they live in the soil or they just have memory that they come back. They will come back year after. Once you got them, they come back year after year after year. So what you do is use row covers. And you put the row covers on the plants as soon as you plant in the ground. You have to, because once they start, you'll never get rid of them. Row covers, remember, are the thin white fabric that you kind of put over wire that covers your plants. And you have to make sure that you put something that holds the row cover down. It could be a board or staples or whatever you have, so that no bug could get in there and have your salad before you. And again, like I said, we have to mulch. We mulch everything to make sure we suppress weeds. Here's two different varieties of kale. You can see this is a smooth leaf and this is a curly leaf. Both are good. They have a slightly different taste. There's a lot of varieties of kale. You could find your favorite. You want to harvest the baby. If you want to eat baby kale, you harvest it about 30 days after it's been planted, transplanted. You harvest individual leaves from the bottom for continuous growth, kind of just like the Swiss chard. You grasp the leaf stem near the stalk and twist it off. But in order for the plant to keep growing, you have to leave at least 4 leaves at the top. And as we mentioned before, taste improves with frost into the winter. So coming up, Linda's going to take over and she's going to tell you all about lettuce, arugula, spinach, broccoli, and onions. So take it on, Linda.
Oops, now you can hear me. Sorry, classic, I was on mute. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, lettuce. So hello, everybody. My name is Linda DeGasper. I'm a Master Gardener volunteer. And one thing about myself I wanted to share was my start in gardening. As a kid, I grew up with parents who had a vegetable garden, which I didn't really pay much heed to. It was more of a chore. But as an adult, I really got into gardening, love it. I do ornamentals and flowers, and I also do some vegetable gardening. I don't have a humongous vegetable garden like some of our other Master Garden volunteers and those others in our group. But I do have, just to give you a picture, I do raised bed gardening for my vegetables. And I have about 3 beds that are generally 4 by 8. And it's a raised bed, and something to share for those who are starting out. I opted with a raised bed partly because of the benefits of the soil warms faster, it's better draining, and I know some takeaways, just sharing, our tips and things with folks. I definitely wish I had made beds that were no more than 3 feet wide. I'm an average size person. If you're extremely tall, I think maybe 4 feet might be more comfortable, but I find leaning over to a 4-foot bed is a little bit more straining on the back. So just some tips out there. I also find that I don't use soil in my raised beds. I started with a mix. So you can find and Google this through a lot of the educational sites. There's a lot of different advice out there, but the educational institutions generally recommend not to have 100% garden soil in a raised bed. You'll get better drainage by adding compost. So you'll see 50-50, you'll see mixtures of garden soil, compost, and some type of perlite or vermiculite. Bottom line is there's lots of options out there, but I do find I benefit from a nice mix. Okay, on to lettuce. So lettuce is very easy to grow. When we have this class live, we always have the group do some actual seeding of lettuce in pots in the class. But you'll have your experience, especially if you get the seeds. So lettuce comes in seed packs, or you can buy transplants. Another cool season crop that you'll hear the theme that as soon as the soil can be worked, so that can be as early as March, that you can put seeds in the ground. Generally, there's two types of lettuce. One is the head lettuces like romaine or iceberg. And then there's the lettuce mixes like a mesclun mix.
Well, Linda, I want to add, because we're seeing more questions that allude to things like you were talking about when from the first class. There was a whole section on how to use raised beds and containers and what kind of soil and mix to use in raised beds and containers, along with mulching and many other questions we're getting in the box. I'm really glad that first class is recorded because I think several of you missed it. So I'm hoping that you can catch up with that class via the recording, because those things apply to all of our vegetables that we're going to be treating this week and next week. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Chris. So, of course, likes full sun, especially in the spring, but it can take some shade. What will happen is in the spring, the sun is not as strong as it is in the summer. So you can have full sun in the spring, but as we get into summer with a stronger sun, sometimes the lettuce can get a benefit by having some partial shade. So sometimes when you're planting things, you can have lettuce be in the shadow of a taller vegetable. It likes fertile, well-drained soil. And by fertile, I mean that it likes to have a decently nutrient soil. Some vegetables don't care, but lettuce is one of many that do. It has light to moderate water needs, and at the time of prepare the soil and or the transplant by putting some fertilizer in the soil. So if you buy a packet of seed, you want to follow the packet instructions. We have a picture on the right of a seed packet. I don't know exactly which type of lettuce this is, but the advice generally will be to plant it about 1/4 inch deep. Some lettuces you'll see will require 1/8 of an inch. So this year I was planting a mix and I found 2 out of 4 said 1/8 and 2 out of 4 said 1/4 inch deep. Generally, you can work in rows and plant them 1 inch deep, but the goal will be to eventually thin. And as Lorraine had said, you want to eat those thinnings. But by allowing enough space, the plant can have room to grow and not have to fight for resources. Another way to plant them instead of rows is to broadcast the seeds across an area. And what I mean by broadcast is you can just sprinkle the seeds. One tip would be, because the seeds are very tiny, and this is true for any small seed, you can mix 1 part seed to 2 parts sand. And that way you'll get a good dispersion across an area. And then once you have the seedlings rise, you want to mulch. So wait until the seedlings arise, or if you do transplants, mulch afterwards. That way, as you know, we're big on mulching. So one thing to note is you can do both seeds and transplants. That's what I do. I always start some seeding, but I always find that the transplants I get in the store, because they've been in a greenhouse, are larger and more robust at the moment. So what will happen is I have both, and the transplants will come in first, followed by my seed grown. Okay, harvesting lettuce. So basically by sowing in late March and April, we can by all means go right ahead right now. You're going to get some lettuce by May through June. Just like Lorraine had mentioned, some of the vegetables, including lettuce, you can harvest from the outside leaves inward. That way your plant still grows, but you're getting some of it to eat. The other way to do it, especially if you want more, is you just chop it at the soil level and harvest the whole head or whole plant. And the picture here shows the difference between transplants or seedlings that were April 23rd and just about a month later, the size of them. Okay, so we're talking about cool season veggies. So what about lettuce in the summer? Lettuce doesn't like the heat. And what'll happen is it will go bolting. And bolting is when a plant sets forth seed because it knows its life cycle is coming up and it wants to set seed. So one indication that a plant is bolting or going to be is on the left. That's a lettuce plant that has grown very tall. Bolting will cause the plant to go really change its shape. And you'll see what I mean, where it tends to be nice and roundish, but then it'll start to elongate itself in response to heat. One drawback about bolting is the plant itself becomes bitter. You don't want to be eating it, or you can, but just not as nice. And one benefit of bolting is a free way to get seeds is let some of your plants bolt, go to flower, collect the seed, or like one of my fellow gardeners, she allows the seed she doesn't collect it, and the following year it just kind of disperses, and she'll collect the little seedlings when they emerge, and then she moves them into the place that she wants them to be at. So some free seed.
I want to mention, Linda, that what I showed last week in the introduction was my lettuce bowls, the small bowls that I put out on my patio table in the spring. In addition to growing lettuce in the ground, I also have one or more bowls on my patio table because that elongates the season for lettuce, in that if you've got it in a container, you can give it more full sun early in the season, and then as you get into June, you can start, and things get really hot, you can put it under on the patio table. I put up my umbrella, so it's only getting morning sun, and at that point that saves, it gives it more life. It gives a longer season because then you're not subjecting it to the heat and the sun of summer. You're modifying it because you've got it in a portable container.
Excellent. I think let's see if I have a picture of that. Maybe, we'll see. So of course, another pest to learn about, aphids. Aphids affect a variety of plants. So just know that you don't need a chemical for aphids. Just wash off the plant with a blast of water. They will fall to the ground and they will not make it back to the plant. So a great effective way, a natural way to get rid of aphids, or use an insecticidal soap. Cutworms, as Lorraine mentioned, cutworms are also a bother, and you'll see a picture of it to the right, to the roundish worm. By using a collar, you can protect the plant at the time of transplants, at the time of planting, or wait until the plants mature, or when you have a seedling, protect it with the collar. Notice that we have a slug. Slugs are also a fan of lettuce. So know that they come out at night. You can pick them, hand pick them to get rid of them. You can also trap and bait them. They, of course, sell a product out there, but one better recommendation is to utilize a damp wood board or a piece of burlap. They will gravitate to that. And then the next morning you can lift up the board. They'll be there so you can hand pick. I did this by accident when I had a little compost container that I left on the ground, and it had like a rim underneath it. So they all, every night once I realized I caught one, I just left it there every single night and caught like a number of slugs that way. So it worked well, natural way to do it. And also I want to share, if you see the picture on the top, we have a beneficial insect. On the left is the Asian ladybug, the classic ladybug that we all know. What looks really scary is the larva of that same ladybug. Is actually, the larva that will be the ladybug that eats the aphids. So it's one thing to note that you want to learn your bugs, because some people may see the larva of the Asian ladybug and destroy it, but that would be not a good thing because it does help protect by eating aphids. Okay, arugula. Also known as roquette or rocket. I've been recently had the chance to watch Gardener's World. It's a BBC gardening show in Britain. And I found it kind of funny because I don't know anybody who calls it rocket. But when I was watching this British gardening show, that's all they call it. They call it rocket, and you never hear them say arugula. So again, goes by many names. Not everybody loves it because it does have that little spicy heat flavor to it. But it is a super cold hardy vegetable. So early spring or fall, you can grow it, and it grows fast. The days of maturity, again, when you place the seed in the ground, in 3 weeks, 21 days, you can have baby arugula harvested, or leave it to the mature level of 40 days. Arugula tends to be pretty compact, about a foot tall, up to a foot wide. I mean, yeah, foot tall, foot wide.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat about somebody who also loves that show and had no idea they were talking about arugula. I thought they were completely different crops for years myself. Linda, there's a question. It might be good to repeat what you said about a wet board.
Oh, sure. For the slugs?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, you can dampen a wood board and leave it out near the garden, and the slugs will be attracted to it and they'll go underneath it. So the next morning you can, look at the board, you'll see the slug attached and pull it away, and that way you can collect them that way.
It's cheaper than beer.
Yeah, you'll see that too. I was, for this presentation, I was researching that. As Master Gardener volunteers, our whole goal is to educate the public on information based on research and data, not anecdotal or like possible things that may or may not work. And
we call them Aunt Betty's cures.
Yes. And so you may hear beer being used in a little dish and laying it out, putting it out at night, and the slugs will be attracted to the fermented product and come crawling into the beer, and then you can collect them and get rid of them the next morning. I really couldn't find exactly, again, an educational institution that noted that as a way to do it, but I hear anecdotally tons of people talk about that and saying it's successful.
Many of us have tried it, and many of us have been so disgusted by it that there are still little bowls of beer with mushy dead slugs in gardens all through the country that haven't been picked up because they're so disgusting.
Great, thank you. Okay, so how to grow arugula. So again, another full sun, and it can tolerate some partial shade. A classic vegetable. You'll kind of see that like everything needs good drainage. But in this case, arugula doesn't need a very fertile soil, so you don't need fertilizer when you're planting it. Of course, it likes the rich organic soil and a neutral pH generally. So how to plant it? Again, as soon as the soil can be worked, that's in March and April, and the depth follow the package, generally 1/4 inch, space it 1 inch apart, and then when you thin it out, leave enough space for it to grow. And of course, the broadcast scattering of the seeds is also another way to go. One thing about arugula is it is extremely super fast to germinate. Within 5 days. You will get little seedlings popping up, nothing better. So of course, when you have seedlings emerge or transplants, you want to mulch them. Again, like Lorena was saying, it's so important to mulch. It conserves moisture, it blocks the weeds, and it also helps with keeping the soil temperature down and cool. And that's what these cool veggies really need. On the right, you'll see a picture of little snips, and you'll see this was arugula grown in a cell pack. And as much as it may pain you, whether it be in the ground or in a cell pack, is to snip. It is really important to not have the seedlings compete with each other for the nutrients, the water. I used to it took me years to get over destroying plants. You know, in the case of vegetables, you can eat them, which is great. But sometimes when you're growing flowers, you know, you just feel terrible having to snip off all these good plants, little seedlings. But it's definitely the right thing to do. And the other thing is know your seedling identification. That can help, especially if you're in an area in the ground and, you know, you're competing with weeds. You want to be able to, you know, recognize your crop. And sometimes the seed packets will actually show that. Okay, here's a little quiz question for the audience. Here's a container of arugula. Can you tell me what's wrong with this picture? And I'll just kind of give you guys a few seconds to think about it. Note that in a class we would be able to talk about it, but we can't have, you know, everybody be unmuted. But just think about what's wrong with this picture.
We're getting actually some answers in the chat room, and they're right.
Oh, excellent. So
Amy says too condensed. Katrina says too close.
Awesome.
And Elizabeth says crowded.
Very good.
And Carol says, I think it has an aphid on it. Needs to be thin, says John. Too close, says Karen. Oh my gosh, we've got advanced students here.
Awesome. Excellent eyes. And that's exactly it. Like for arugula and some crops, you know, they're going to be now competing for the resources in the soil, the water, and the nutrients. So having it more spread out is important, especially we talked about like head lettuces. Head lettuce is just not going to grow nicely if you don't give it enough space. Good job, class. So now harvesting arugula, you can pick individual leaves. Generally at the 40-day mark, that's the, again, according to the seed packet, it'll tell you, you want to harvest the whole plant. Don't let it go further on because a mature plant will become tough. The texture and the flavor is going to be altered and deteriorate. So one thing, you know, we talked about bolting, and the heat will make arugula bolt. The picture on the right, you see that elongation in the flower stalk coming up, and on the right, you can see the actual flower. It is actually edible. So if you do happen to have arugula that goes to seed, you can harvest some of the flowers and or leave it to go to seed and then get some seed next year. And once, of course, anything bolting, it becomes very bitter, arugula. So pests, flea beetles are a problem for arugula. Again, as with others have said, in the beginning, I didn't have a problem with these, and now I do, or have been for a few years now. So use a floating row cover. That'll help protect the plant, especially so that they can't access the plant to eat holes in the leaves. Lorraine spoke about a trap crop, and that's the radishes. Planting those, they'll be more attracted to the radish than they will the arugula. And the trap crop, again, you just want to let it go to seed. You're not going to be using those radishes, just use it as a trap crop. Okay, on to spinach. So another cold hardy spinach plant. And it's so cold hardy that some of your plants in the fall, you can leave them in the ground and they'll come back next spring because they'll be able to survive the winter. Another fast grower, within 3 weeks, 21 days, you'll have baby spinach ready to eat, or wait the 40 days for the full size. And again, similar to arugula, same compact plant, about 6 inches to a foot tall and wide. So in general, they are sensitive to the heat. So by the end of June, you'll be done with your spinach. So generally, there's 2 types of spinach: the smooth leaf type that you see a picture of on the left, and the curly leaf type. And sometimes it'll be referred to as Savoy. I've seen that on some seed packets, so you can kind of know what to expect. So it likes full sun. It can handle some partial shade. Picture on the right is a sprout, a very distinctive sprout of spinach. And again, it can be quick to germinate, 6 to 10 days. One thing about spinach, like some of the crops, is they are sensitive. It is sensitive to soil moisture. It has very shallow roots, and if it dries out, the plant will be greatly stressed. So one thing I noticed, I learned Sorry, my dog is scratching at the dog trying to get in here, and so forgive me if you hear that. So what I learned before becoming a master gardener, I didn't realize what was happening. My spinach would turn yellowish on the edges, and I assumed, oh, it needs fertilizer. Something, again, we've learned as master gardener volunteers is don't make assumptions, do the research, find out what's happening to properly correct the situation. Once I kept the moisture constant, I've had no problem growing spinach. It definitely does not like to have the consistent, it likes consistency, doesn't want to be dried out and then watered and dried out. Okay, planting guidelines, basically as soon as the soil can be worked, again, a common theme. So here we are in April, go right ahead, get the spinach into the ground, follow the seed packet directions, give space when you're going into rows or use the broadcast seed method across a wider area. Generally, you want to thin to 2 to 6 inches for each plant. If you do place them too close together, it will stress them out. Again, they're competing for that water and the nutrients. And then the mulch, of course, will keep it nice and moist and weed-free. So here's another picture. What's wrong with this picture? Take a few moments and put some answers in the chat box and see what you think. Okay, I bet you some of you know that you can see the mulch that's in use is not covering the entire plant. It's got some coverage on most of them, but not that bottom one. And you might recognize it as the black mulch. It's a dyed mulch, and that's actually okay. We've been, based on what we've researched, technically the dyes are food safe. However, I would still lean to not using a dyed mulch for vegetables. And the other thing that you can't really see in this, but this is, instead of being individual plants, they're 4-packs. So these were transplants in a 4-pack, and the whole thing was taken out and plopped into the ground. So instead of 3 plants, there's 12 plants there. And so again, crowded, going to compete for resources and stress them out. Okay, so time to harvest. Like the others, picking the outer leaves will keep your plant going, and you can pick at any time, including baby leaves if you want more tender spinach. But when the hot weather comes, just definitely chop the base of the plant and harvest the entire thing. Again, the bolting will cause a degradation of the plants, the texture and the flavor. So we keep talking about when it gets hot out. It's kind of, we want to be as clear as we can. When temperatures elevate for consistently within 3 days, like 3 days of higher heat, that'll be enough for the plants to bolt. And this goes across for a lot of the lettuces and arugulas and the spinach. The picture here on the right, you can kind of see how a flower bud is forming. And so that plant has begun bolting. In addition, you can't tell from this picture, but the leaves, instead of being out flat, they're growing upwards. And that's another indication that it was beginning to bolt.
Typically, they anything that bolts sends up a central stem that is a fairly woody stem, because that stem's purpose is to produce flowers to go to seed, because that plant says, oh, I'm dying, I better produce babies. And that's the end of the crop for that plant, yes.
Excellent. Okay, pests for spinach, leaf miners are a problem. Lorraine talked about this for kale also. So use that fine floating row cover to protect from the adult flies. The adult flies will lay eggs, and those eggs you can see on the left-hand photo. They'll be on the underside of the leaf. So make sure, in general, always inspect your gardens for insect damage, insects being around underneath the leaves. Those leaf miners will become worms, as you can see on the right-hand side of the picture. If you see that, you want to get that leaf, see how the damage it's caused, pick them out. Not only pick out the insect, but get rid of the leaf. Okay, one thing to note about lettuce, arugula, and spinach is that you can stretch the season. And what I mean by that is succession planting. Lorraine mentioned that for the other crops also, is if you plant it one time, all of those plants will come to harvest at the same time. And I have to say, in my earlier days and years of gardening, I would plant everything at the same time because it was convenient, quick, organized. And then I would get everything harvesting at the same time. So I'd have so much lettuce, I didn't know what to do with it. So it's recommended to pace yourself succession planting every 1, 2, 3 weeks. And that way you'll extend your harvest and use our last frost date. In general, our last frost date is May 15th. That's the guides we give, but it can vary year to year. But again, sow every 1, 2, or 3 weeks continually so you can create a longer growing season. Also for lettuce, arugula, spinach, you can plant in the fall. Again, they're cool season veggies. They like the cool. So what you would do is generally sowing seeds mid-August to September. And one way to do it is, if one takeaway is look at that seed packet. If the days to maturity is 40 days, and again, our first frost date is October 15th. So you can take October 15th minus 40 days gives you September 1st. So that's when you would plant for fall. So one thing about these crops, they like the cool weather. End of August and early September can be very, very warm, if not hot. So seeds won't germinate as well. So what you want to do is overcompensate or compensate for that by overseeding a little thicker or heavier. So just do a higher rate of seeds to make sure they germinate, or you can pre-germinate in the refrigerator. You would take a moist towel, sprinkle seeds, fold it over onto itself, stick it in the fridge in a plastic bag, and then wait for the typical germination times. Pull it out, you'll see the germinated seeds, and then plant them into the garden. Okay, on to broccoli, the king of cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli is a member of the mustard or the brassica family. You might be noticing that we talk about the different families, and there's a reason for that. When you are, and we touched upon this about crop rotation in the first class, just know that you want to ensure you don't plant the same family in the same plot year after year. You want to rotate so it can help reduce the risk of the insects and diseases that would be present. So it's good to know. One thing I learned for this class was that arugula is actually in the brassica family too, which surprised me. For some reason, I thought it was with the lettuce family, but it's not. So broccoli, it is a cool season, plant in early spring. We recommend growing by transplants because the days to maturity for a seed is just too long. The seeds take 150 days. That's 5 months before you will eat your broccoli if you plant by seed. So we strongly recommend, especially now, here we are in mid-April, get the transplants and put them into the ground. So 2 types of broccoli, the heading broccoli, where you can imagine the nice central head, a large head that I think is the most common type of broccoli that you'll see. It has nice, tightly packed flower buds. Broccoli is actually the flower. That's what we're eating a non-blooming flower head when we're eating broccoli. So you would get the central head, you harvest that. For another type of broccoli, it's called the sprouting broccoli, and those are your broccoli robs. It's the plant, instead of having a central head in the center, will have multiple heads, little heads growing throughout the plant. And the one thing about sprouting broccoli is those varieties tend to be hardier to the colds. So it does like full sun. So again, no partial shade here. You want full sun, and we mean 8 hours of full sun for defining for vegetables. Soil wants to be nice and moist, and of course, well draining, generally neutral pH. One thing to note that if we have sandy soil, our region doesn't have much many areas with sandy soil, so it's not an issue, but heads will not form on a broccoli plant if the soil is too sandy. So again, cool season, summer heat will cause it to bolt. And here you can see on the picture on the right, this is a broccoli head that's starting to bolt. It's becoming really elongated, and the flower buds are changing. And you'll see more in the next slide, in 2 slides. So how to plant, transplant 2 weeks before the last frost date. So here we are about that time. These plants are large. I underestimated the first time I grew broccoli in, and I did not allow 2 to 3 feet, and I would say 3 feet. They grew into monsters. So 3 by 3 feet to give it enough space, enough aeration, and enough of the soil resources and moisture to keep a good, strong, healthy plant. Also use collars to protect the plant. Same thing, because they'll have some possible damage by cutworms. In general, the collars, tip is to have 1 inch above the soil, 1 inch below the soil to provide a good barrier. So how to harvest broccoli. The picture on the left, you can see the head. It's nicely, tightly packed. That's what you're looking for to harvest. On the bottom left, you'll see the first picture. The head is starting to get less tight, and it's starting to get a yellow tinge. That means that the broccoli is becoming past its prime. The middle picture on the bottom is where the florets are starting to flower. That's the flowers that you're seeing. And then on the far right is the whole head is becoming a bunch of yellow flowers. So that's where you want to make sure you start to learn how to identify to properly harvest it. So one thing about the central type of heading broccoli is that once you pick the central head, you can allow the plant to, you don't have to harvest and get rid of the whole plant. You can just harvest the central head. The plant will send up additional heads throughout the plant. They won't be as large, but they'll be just as tasty, and they can be prolific enough to warrant keeping the plant. I know for myself, because I have a small garden, I don't have a lot of space, so I can't afford the loss of real estate to allow the broccoli to take up all that space. So I'll harvest the central head and out it goes. But you can keep it. It produces more little florets on the plant. So number 1 pest problem is the imported cabbage worm, and you'll see a picture of that to the right. Generally, the cabbage worm will become the cabbage moth that you see in the bottom of the screen with the black dots on its wings. They can be very prevalent. Know that they can generate 2 to 3 generations per year, so it's very important to use row covers at the time of planting to protect your broccoli plants. And then if you see those caterpillars, again, constantly monitor your garden, inspect the plants, look for them and pick them. Yeah. And with some damage, there's some other damage by the leaves on the left-hand side, classic damage by the imported cabbage worm. Okay, on to onions. So onions are a cool season crop. They start, now is the time to plant them in early spring. Again, we don't recommend seed growing because the time it would take for the days of maturity is just too long. And what you'll find, the common way to grow them is in what are called sets. And those are the actual little bulbs that we'll talk about in the next slide, or the transplants. Those are little transplants just like we see for other crops. So it takes 14 weeks to become mature, and that's with the set or the transplant, not starting from seed. So you can see how it takes quite a while. By planting now, you'll get some onions starting in mid-July. So onions, you can let them go to be their mature size, but like lots of vegetables, you can harvest them a little sooner. You can get smaller onions or bunching onions. They also, think of green onions or scallions, but know that there are different varieties that are meant to be green onions and scallions, but at any time you can harvest a little early. So they like full sun, fertile soil, well drained, a neutral pH, and basically they like consistent moisture also. They are also taller plants, 1 to 3 feet in height. And as they grow, it is very common that the bulb itself will start to show itself because it's kind of almost looks like it's coming out of the ground, and that's okay. So don't be alarmed if you look down and you're seeing the tops of your onions plants exposed. That's common. It's okay to see that. So these are sets. What you'll do is you'll go to, you'll see these bins or bags, and you'll find onion sets. And here's an example where red onion, white onion, and yellow onion. Bigger is not better. You want a nice firm bulb, so squeeze it. You want it to be 3/4 of an inch or less. They just get a better start by being smaller, and plant them in early spring. So we're still in that window to be purchasing them. You want to take the set, push it into the ground about 1 inch deep, and then mulch it immediately. Now the spacing, just like what Lorraine said about the carrots, how big will the onion be? Is it going to be a 2-inch onion or a 4-inch onion? So that'll determine how far apart you place the onion sets. Now here's a picture of transplants. If you purchase these, just make sure that you don't, it's a 4-pack, but it's actually more plants. You want to individually pull them apart because they will interfere with each other by being crowded. So gently tease them apart, use water to help separate, and clearly have separate plants, put them into your soil. Make sure you don't, if you don't plant them too deeply. Wherever they were in the cell pack is where you want to keep them at the soil level, no deeper. And then of course, mulch immediately. I do find it harder to mulch because these are so skinny and small. But you know, we believe in mulch. It helps suppress the weeds and keep cool soil and moist. So just, you know, do your part to keep up the mulching, even with the little strings. Okay, what about harvesting? I love onions because they let me know when it's time to harvest. Basically, the leaves will start to fall over and turn color. So here on the right, you can see the tan, the browning of the leaves, or it's like a tan color. They start to flop over. When you see that, push back the rest of them and the rest of the plant. So you're going to fold over, and then that way, let them sit and fully dry out. That'll activate them to fully dry out, especially if you planted them at the same time. Pull them out, let them dry for a few days so you can cure them. Now, one thing about if you plan to use it right away, by all means, you can do that with an onion. But if you want to cure it, you want to stop watering before pulling the bulb out. So by stopping the water, it'll just accelerate how quickly they cure, because essentially curing is like drying the plant out. So by stopping water, you want to intentionally not give it additional water at that time.
We have a question about onions in containers, but we want to emphasize that anything grown in a container is harder to keep moist. And for a crop like onions or carrots, or what's the other one that demands? Spinach, constant moisture. It's like tomatoes. They don't like to dry out and then get soaked, and then dry out and then get soaked. They want a constant, it's well drained, and that you get easily in a container. They won't sit in water, and yet it's very hard to keep a container so watered so consistently that the soil stays fairly moist. Very hard to do with a container. You can try it. Or you can get what I talked about in the first class, a reservoir container that has water from the bottom, and the roots reach down for that water, and the water wicks up from the bottom and is constant. That's in the first class.
Thanks, Chris. So harvest, you can harvest at any time if you want them more immature but ready to use, or wait until they get more mature. The bunching types, you want to have a smaller type, no more than 1/2 inch. And one thing to note, if you've never grown onions, and especially for cooking, they're going to be a little more mild and sweeter than what you buy in the store. So curing and storing onions, just a quick overview of how to do it. So you harvest the whole plant, You don't wash it. You let it dry in a protected area, shake off all the excessive soil. And then what you want to do is allow the entire plant to dry out thoroughly. So don't snip it yet, but when it is dry, that's when you're going to clip the top to 1/4 of an inch of the stem and then store in a cool, dry place. The picture on the left, you'll see, like here's a great picture of the whole plant being dried out, and you can see how thoroughly they're all tan and brown. The bottom picture will happen sometimes. If you get a thick neck onion, they don't store well, and just harvest them immediately. Of course, onions have their own critters and diseases. So the botrytis, leaf blight, the purple blotch, thrips, and onion maggots could be a problem. I personally never experienced this. Knock on wood. You know, I definitely haven't had that problem, but just be aware that they are out there, and to get in further information for how to protect your plants, which I'll show you in a minute how we could do that. I think that's the last slide for onions. Yep. Okay, so one thing I want to go, because let's do a time check. I think we're getting close. Yep, 3 minutes to 7:30. So
Good job.
Thank you. Know that Cornell has these vegetable growing guides, which are fantastic. They have 58 garden vegetables. They provide detailed descriptions and growing instructions on them. The website is located here, or just type in Cornell Vegetable Growing Guide. Another tip I advocate a lot, and if you've heard this at the first class, forgive the repeat, but search better by using this addition to your searching, your phrase or your keyword. So site:.edu. So for instance, if you want to learn more about slug control, site:.edu. What this will do, it will bring you information from educational sites. So you won't get .com research results. And sometimes it's advantageous because, let's say you want information based on science and data. You don't want somebody trying to sell you a product for slug control, sell you a chemical, when there could be other alternatives that are safer and more effective. So a great tip out there for gathering information and to help you in your gardening adventures.
Thanks, Linda.
I'll leave that up there just for those people jotting down any notes, but I just want to say thank you to everybody. I hope you enjoyed this part, and I'll turn it over to Chris.
Well, I'm looking at the chat room, and I'm seeing that we have been, between the two of us, pretty much keeping up with your questions on chat, but you can also, we introduced the idea in the last class that if you have questions, which you're going to have, you can keep getting Cornell information by either accessing the Cornell Master Gardener hotline, which is now in effect from April to October on Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to noon. But you access all of that, including being able to email our coordinator, Joyce Tomaselli, at Cornell by going to ccedutchess.org. That's CCE Dutchess. That's for Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess, ccedutchess.org, and then click on gardening. And that will bring up, that's the universe that Joyce coordinates. And there's everything from being able to sign up for our Master Garden newsletter, Dutchess Dirt, to other kinds of sources like this actually what Linda has put here with the home gardening source at Cornell is on there, as are many other things having to do with composting and limitless subjects, but also that gives you the email access to Joyce Tomaselli as well, if you think that you can't call in on Wednesday morning. So next week we're going to start off, and I think is it going to be Lorraine who starts off, or Linda next week on hot weather vegetables? We'll see. We will see. We will see who's going to belly up to that bar first. But in the meantime, we appreciate your questions and your interest and your attendance. So I guess I'm going to, I think if Chris is still here, she can end the session. Or did you have anything else to say, Krista?
just want to thank you again, Chris, Lorraine, and Linda for a great presentation. I will be attaching the first class video to an email with this class video. And also, if you miss, I'm going to email every single video that we have for these classes to every email I have for the registration for these classes. And if you did attend the class last week and we had talked about the free seed packets, so if you haven't picked those up yet, there are still some at Adrian's at the checkout desk. That's at 93 Market Street in Poughkeepsie. And you can just ask the staff there just for your packet. They know what that's about. And other than that, thank you so much again, and hope to see you next week for our third and final class for Veggies.
Thank you, Krista, for being such a great host.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you,
again.
Crystal. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
See you next week.
Don't forget, you can start planning this week.
Oh, yeah.